The Mars Curiosity rover is busy making new discoveries after NASA scientists were worried it may have been down for the count last week. Last Friday, the spacecraft had a minor hiccup during booting up, which knocked it out of commission, but it is now back to normal after a reboot. Curiosity is one of two NASA spacecraft actively studying the Martian surface. John Scott up next with the Fox Report.
See you later.
We begin with a deadly plane crash in southeastern Texas earlier today. The cargo jet, a wide-body Boeing 767, reportedly was on its way to Houston from Miami. At least 3 people are believed dead in the crash. More on this story coming up. But first, violent clashes amid a standoff over humanitarian aid. Thousands of rival protesters take to the streets as tensions in Venezuela reach a boiling point. I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. Convoys carrying tens of millions of dollars in emergency supplies struggled to get into Venezuela after the country's contested president, Nicolas Maduro, closed all border crossings, claiming the aid is part of a U.S.-led coup. This as more members of the Venezuelan military denounce Maduro in favor of opposition leader Juan Guaido. Lawmakers sounding off on the growing crisis.
I think the United States needs to continue backing Brazil and Colombia, the neighbors which circle Venezuela, and offer them support while we continue to make sure every Venezuelan knows that there's food all around the border waiting for them if we can just get it in there.
I think we have to be very careful about a military intervention at this point. I don't believe that's the solution. I think the solution right now is to support the interim government, to give them the legitimacy.
Brian Yennis is in Atlanta now with more. Brian.
Good evening, John. There were some tense standoffs and deadly clashes between Venezuela's opposition and President Nicolas Maduro's security forces today. At least 2 people are dead at this hour and at least 18 are injured when there was a clash along the Venezuelan-Brazilian border. According to a reputable nonprofit they say that pro-Maduro colectivos, or private gangs, opened fire on civilians. According to the Associated Press, 2 humanitarian aid trucks are stuck trying to get into Venezuela there. But President Maduro's National Guardsmen have blocked the border crossing. All day today, Venezuelans have tried to help push these humanitarian aid trucks past blockaded border crossings. Venezuelans have been met with tear gas. In the border city of Uriña, Venezuela, protesters lit a city bus on fire. At one point, a couple humanitarian aid trucks were reportedly bombed by Venezuela's national police. Desperate Venezuelans could be seen trying to salvage whatever food, medicine, and supplies that they could get. Thousands of Venezuelans took to the streets today at the request of opposition leader Juan Guaido. The 35-year-old is recognized by the United States as the legitimate interim president of Venezuela. Today, he urged all Venezuelans to unite in allowing these aid trucks to enter. Guaido tweeted this video today showing soldiers deserting Maduro's regime in favor of his government. Video of at least 4 National Guardsmen abandoning their border posts in favor of the opposition has also gone viral. Guaido, who was seen on a humanitarian aid truck this morning in Colombia, claims some humanitarian aid trucks have made it into the country, though we cannot independently confirm that. Meanwhile, President Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, and National Security Advisor John Bolton have all tweeted their support for Guaido. Bolton tweeting, quote, "Venezuela's military has a choice. Embrace democracy, protect civilians, and allow in humanitarian aid, or face even more sanctions and isolation." Meanwhile, President Nicolas Maduro, he gave a speech to his supporters in the capital of Caracas, Venezuela today, urging the imperialist United States and President Donald Trump to keep their hands off Venezuela. He urged Venezuelans to defend the country's freedom and independence at all costs, vowing that he would even give his life to see a free and independent Venezuela if necessary. John.
Brian Yennis. Brian, thank you. The special counsel, Robert Mueller's office, releasing a new sentencing memo for Paul Manafort. The document slams the former Trump campaign chair for what it calls brazen illegal activity. This as the new Attorney General, William Barr, begins to oversee the special counsel's investigation into President Trump. His former campaign manager defending his boss.
I have a lot of faith in Attorney General Barr. I'm glad that he's overseeing this final resolution. Attorney General Barr is going to be the one person who has the full unredacted version. He'll write a summary, he'll present it to Congress, and he will show through his summary of the work that Bob Mueller has done, there was no collusion of the Trump campaign with any outside entity.
David Spunt is live from Washington with the latest. David.
Hey, John, good evening. A lot to digest. So the deadline last night at midnight, that deadline was met, but the documents weren't released until a few hours ago. 800 pages total, which include exhibits. The actual sentencing memo, I have it right here, just 25 pages. As you can see, these black lines heavily redacted. I spoke with our justice producer this afternoon, says there are no major bombshells in this 25-page memo. In fact, many expected to find out an actual prison recommendation for Paul Manafort, but there's no specific sentence number mentioned. The memo reads, quote, Manafort chose repeatedly and knowingly to violate the law, whether the laws prescribed garden variety crimes such as tax fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice and bank fraud, or more esoteric laws that he nevertheless was intimately familiar with, such as Foreign Agents Registration Act. Now, this news about Manafort comes as an official with the Justice Department told Fox News just yesterday that the special counsel's report will not be released to the Justice Department this coming week. Court documents allege that Paul Manafort shared polling data with an associate who authorities argue has ties to the Russian intelligence community. Back in September, Manafort pled guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy related to his lobbying work in Ukraine as part of a plea agreement. Now, Mueller's team originally planned to cut Manafort some slack, offer him some leniency. That all went out the window, John, when a judge found that Manafort lied to investigators after agreeing to work with them. Before the special counsel report is released, it will go to the Attorney General Barr, who we just talked about. President Trump was asked about this report yesterday in the Oval Office.
You know why I won the race? Because I was a better candidate than she was, and had nothing to do with Russia. And everybody knows it's a hoax. It's one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetrated on this country. So I look forward to seeing the report. If it's an honest report, it will say that. If it's not an honest report, it won't.
Important to point out that this is not the only case on Manafort's plate. On March 8th, in a few weeks, he will be sentenced in a Virginia case in Alexandria involving tax and bank fraud. 69-year-old Paul Manafort could get up to 25 years in that Virginia case. But this sentencing memo wraps up arguing that releasing Manafort from prison presents a risk of him doing it all over again. John.
David Spunt. David, thank you. Meanwhile, President Trump taking care of business before heading off to Vietnam for next week's North Korean nuclear summit. Meeting this week with a top Chinese official and nominating a new U.S. ambassador to the UN. Ellison Barber wraps it all up live from Washington. Ellison.
Hi, John. Yeah, President Trump expressed optimism during an Oval Office meeting on Friday, but at the same time, the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said that there are still some very big hurdles when it comes to reaching a trade deal between the U.S. and China. China, according to the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, committed to buying an additional 10 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans at yesterday's Oval Office meeting. In a tweet, Secretary Perdue said that it is proof the strategy is working. He called it a show of good faith by the Chinese. Negotiators are reportedly working on 6 areas of broad agreement. Among other items, that includes agriculture, currency, and intellectual property rights. Tariffs on roughly $200 billion worth of Chinese products are set to increase by 15% unless there is a deal on March 1st.
Well, I set the deadline of March 1st, and right now it's at 10%. And I think that if, I mean, you can tell this to President Xi, I think that if I see progress being made, substantial progress being made, it would not be inappropriate to extend that deadline, keep it at 10% instead of raising it to 25%, and I would be inclined to doing that. We're going very deep into the trade and covering items that a lot of people wanted to cover and nobody thought would ever get to. But we have a one-time shot at making a great deal for both countries, and so we are going to give it.
If a deal is reached, the president and his advisors say that President Trump will likely meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in March. President Trump said that meeting would most likely take place at the so-called Winter White House at his home in Florida. All of this as the president announces a new nominee for UN ambassador and prepares for his second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Senior administration officials say they've spent the past month negotiating, engaging with their North Korean counterparts, and that will continue until the minute the summit in Vietnam begins. As for for the new UN pick. Kelly Craft is currently the ambassador to Canada. She was involved in talks to renegotiate NAFTA and thought of as a tough negotiator on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Fox News is told that Craft has a good working relationship with Senate Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee. And in part because of that, we're also told that the White House is hoping and expecting that she'll have a bit of a smoother confirmation process because she was recently Senate confirmed. John?
Ellison Barber, thank you. And be sure to stay with Fox News Channel for full coverage of the highly anticipated Trump-Kim summit starting Wednesday, February 27th. But before then, Ed Henry hosts a special previewing the summit live from Vietnam tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Fox News Channel. $1 million. That's the bond a Cook County judge set for embattled singer R. Kelly during a hearing in Chicago today. The R&B star charged with 10 counts of aggravated sexual abuse, which allegedly involve 4 female victims, 3 of whom were minors at the time of the alleged abuse. Matt Finn is live in Chicago with more. Matt.
John, right now, R. Kelly is still locked up inside the Cook County Jail. His attorney says R. Kelly is so broke he does not have the $100,000 to bail himself out of jail, and it's not clear if he's going to come up with that money anytime soon. R. Kelly turned himself into Chicago police last night. Celebrity attorney Michael Avenatti says he is representing one of the young females in this case, and he says he has a new video of R. Kelly involved in a sexual act with a 14-year-old girl. Today, the state's attorney here says that that video does exist. R. Kelly's attorney says he might have engaged in sexual acts, but that does not mean they were forced. And one of the victim's attorneys says R. Kelly's entire circle covers for him.
Did he force them to have sex? Yes. He did not force anyone to have sex. He doesn't have, he's a rock star.
Each of these people, these managers, agents, attorneys, and others continue to get their payday while they look the other way, while this predator molested and sexually abused underage girls.
Robert Kelly faces 3 to 7 years in jail for each of the 10 counts filed against him. In court today, he was relatively quiet, only whispering to his attorney, and no noticeable behavior from R. Kelly. John.
All right, Matt Finn reporting live from Chicago. Matt, thank you. A cargo plane crashes in southeast Texas today, leaving at least 3 people dead. That plane reportedly was on its way to Houston from Miami. Jackie Heinrich live in our New York City newsroom with the latest on that. Jackie.
Well, John, witnesses say the plane went into a nosedive before it crashed. According to radar, it gained considerable speed as it plunged into the water, and there was no distress call. Local sheriff's office described that scene as total devastation, and they said they don't expect to find any survivors. There were 3 people on board that plane. Debris and landing gear is scattered everywhere in Anahuac's Trinity Bay. The marshland is known for duck hunting and has pockets of mud up to 5 feet deep. Investigators say that will make for a difficult recovery as investigators search for the victims and also the plane's black box.
Well, the first thing that I saw the minute I got out there was just floating debris, everything from bed sheets to women's clothing to cardboard boxes to a lot of fiberglass. And then as we got closer, then we started seeing plane debris. But I would say that the largest chunk of the plane that I could actually visually put my eyes on is probably not much larger than about 50 feet.
This is the plane before it took off this morning in Miami. The 767 is one of 30 in Amazon's fleet. It was 26 years old, according to information on its tail number, although an aviation expert tells Fox News the age of the plane would only be relevant if maintenance was not done correctly. The plane was manufactured by Boeing, and about 30 minutes ago, they put out a statement reading, "We are concerned about the safety of the 3 people reported to be on board the plane. We are prepared to provide technical assistance to the National Transportation Safety Board as it investigates the accident." The weather in Houston was clear, so visibility should not have been a problem, but the plane may have crossed through some storm cells on its way into Texas. Around 12:38 p.m., that aircraft descended nearly 12,000 feet in just 30 seconds. The NTSB will ultimately investigate the cause of the crash. Local officials say the cleanup and the investigation could take weeks. John.
All right, Jackie Heinrich reporting. Jackie, thank you. A tense exchange goes viral after students confront Senator Dianne Feinstein over the so-called Green New Deal. Why she is catching flack for her response. Plus a sign of what's to come as the House moves to block President Trump's emergency declaration. So where does the border battle stand?
There is no emergency at the border. It's a mythology of the president, not a reality. When he tries to usurp the power of Congress for spending, he does so at considerable cost to his own effort.
Tonight on the Greg Gutfeld Show, is Trump thinking of nicknames for the 2020 Dems? Can Bernie Sanders go all the way this time? Should dueling with lightsabers be an official sport? Plus, the ISIS bride and some guy named Jussie. It's almost time for the greatest hour of your life. 10 p.m. Eastern, don't miss it.
We've apprehended more people than we have in many, many years. Apprehended meaning we've gotten. With the wall, we wouldn't even have to apprehend them if we had the proper structure. It's costing us a lot of money.
We have a constitutional responsibility to protect and defend the Constitution. To do anything less than overturn this action by the president, we would be delinquent in our duties as those who take an oath to protect the Constitution.
So the border battle rages on as House Democrats introduce a resolution aimed at blocking the president's national emergency declaration, with Senate Democrats poised to follow suit. Garrett Tenney is in Washington with the latest.
Democrats are vowing to fight the president on his emergency declaration in Congress, in the courts, and through public opinion. On Tuesday, the House will vote on what's known as a resolution of disapproval, which would allow Congress to end the national emergency status. Democrats and a number of Republicans argue there is no real emergency that justifies the president's declaration. On Friday in Laredo, Texas, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said it was Congress's constitutional responsibility to block it.
We will be fighting him on this usurping of power, of violating the Constitution of the United States in the Congress, in the courts, and with the American people.
The legislation is expected to sail through the Democratic-controlled House. In the Senate, it's expected to be a bit more of a challenge. Democrats need at least 4 Republicans to support it. So far, only Susan Collins of Maine has said she will vote for it, but a handful of others have also expressed concern over the precedent this use of emergency powers could set. In the Oval Office Friday, President Trump was confident, though, that Republicans will support his move, and even if they don't, he said there is no way that he would sign it.
I think they'll stick, yeah. Everybody knows we need border security. We need a wall. I think it's a very bad subject for the Democrats. We need a wall. On the wall? Yes. Will I veto it? 100%. 100%. And I don't think it survives a veto. We have too many smart people that want border security, so I can't imagine it could survive a veto, but I will veto it, yes.
That would be the first veto of President Trump's administration, and there's not a lot of optimism that Congress can muster up the 2/3 votes necessary to override it. But to be clear, this is just the first of many fights ahead over this emergency declaration. John?
Garrett Tenney, thank you. Meanwhile, Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan got a first-hand look at what's happening at the southern border, visiting troops and touring facilities in El Paso, Texas, a city President Trump has repeatedly claimed was one of the most dangerous in the nation until a border wall was built. Jeff Paul is in Los Angeles with more.
Yeah, Shanahan traveled to the border today working to understand where the gaps in protection are and what DHS specifically needs, both by air and on the ground. He spent the day checking out the border just outside of El Paso, going into portions of New Mexico as well. He visited National Guard mission where they were briefed on and checked out Border Patrol's mobile surveillance vehicles, ATVs, horses, and weapons. It was at this location where the officials fired off some version of a pepper ball gun at the border. Now, Border Patrol says the barrier at this particular site went up in 2008, and once it did, the quality of life improved on the Mexican side because drug smugglers were forced elsewhere. This trip will also help them determine how much money will be spent of the $3.6 billion allocated from the military's construction fund. One official says, quote, the secretary will not use all $3.6 billion if he determines it's not necessary. Now, the areas surveyed are some of the sites requested and prioritized for construction by the Department of Homeland Security in a letter that was sent to the Pentagon last night. Something we should point out, John, in that letter to the Department of Defense, DHS requested, quote, fencing, while the DOD uses the term barrier. None of the officials use the term wall. John?
All right. Thanks very much, Jeff Paul. Senator Dianne Feinstein making headlines after getting into a heated exchange with some San Francisco school kids. The students urged Feinstein to support the Green New Deal, an ambitious and controversial plan to lower carbon emissions and transform the economy. But Feinstein pushed back, and that's when things got a bit tense.
You come in here and you say it has to be my way or the highway. I don't respond to that. I know what I'm doing. So, maybe people should listen a little bit.
Feinstein later called the meeting a spirited discussion, saying the students were heard loud and clear. Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren talking what she wants to see happen in politics.
I'm fighting for big structural change because that's what we need in this country. We have a broken political system. I'm here because I believe in the change we can make together.
So now, with Bernie Sanders officially announcing his run for the highest office, how far left can the Democrats go? Plus, a bill in Colorado would allow the state to join a group of states looking to bypass the Electoral College in favor of the popular vote. Could we be seeing the end of the Electoral College system? Or is this just more outrage because Hillary Clinton lost in 2016?
Why do 12 states get to pick the president, right? So that's what's happening now.
This would be taking away your and my vote and saying, let's let someone else in another state decide.
A Fox News alert: the National Transportation Safety Board is preparing to announce what it has learned so far of the plane crash near Houston, Texas today. A Boeing 767 owned by Atlas Air and flying the colors of Prime Air, the Amazon cargo delivery service. That plane went down into the bay near Houston about 1:45 this afternoon local time. No signs of survivors. There were 3 crew members on board that aircraft. You can see some of the debris, most likely Amazon packages, lying there in the water along with parts of the aircraft. So the National Transportation Safety Board preparing to have that news conference at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. We will let you know if they tell us anything new. Meanwhile, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders throwing his hat into the Democratic presidential primary ring earlier this week, joining an already crowded field, with more expected to jump in. Good evening, I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour. And if you're just joining us, Sanders making his 2020 run for the presidency official on Tuesday. He's expected to expand the debate on democratic socialism in the election cycle. Sanders is now one of 9 Democrats to declare candidacies, with 2 others announcing exploratory committees. Let's bring in Dave Leventhal, senior political reporter and federal politics editor for the Center for Public Integrity. You know, Republicans often like to nominate the second-place finisher from the previous campaign swing the next time around. Is that what Democrats might do with Bernie Sanders this time?
If anything, it's going to be harder for Bernie Sanders this time around because of just the number of candidates that are already in the field. You just showed the graphic, and then we could have several others who get in who are going to be more than just semi-legitimate candidates. They could be front-runner type candidates like a Joe Biden or even a Michael Bloomberg, who has effectively unlimited wealth. So Bernie Sanders, he's got a lot going for him in the sense that he's got a lot of money. He's got a lot of passionate base. He's somebody who, in a way, even though he's on the opposite end of the spectrum from Donald Trump, he has the same kind of support on the left that Donald Trump has on the right, and that can be very, very sustaining fuel for him going deep into this primary season.
But he finished second, obviously, to Hillary Clinton, and she hasn't said one way or the other whether she might consider running again. Is that a possibility?
It seems highly unlikely that, at least at this juncture, Hillary Clinton would get in absent some sort of catastrophic political situation on the Democratic side. You have so many candidates like Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and the list goes on, who very much seem to be trying to vie for the Democratic banner. Most of the Democrats are really not talking about Hillary Clinton right now, at least among the electorate. So look for those candidates to be the ones that are getting all the attention, not some sort of figment of Hillary Clinton coming in and suddenly entering the race in a month or two.
Bernie Sanders certainly changed the conversation last time around as a Democratic socialist running for the presidency.
Sure.
He says the ideas that he brought to the table back then have sort of gone mainstream now. Listen.
All of those ideas, people say, oh, Bernie, they're so radical. They are extreme. The American people just won't accept those ideas. Well, you know what's happened in over 3 years? All of those ideas and many more are now part of the political mainstream.
Is he right?
He's right to a point. For example, H.R. 1 was the first bill that the Democrats put forward in the House when they took control of the House in January. What is H.R. 1? Well, it's a whole package of different types of ethics reforms, campaign finance reforms, lobbying changes. And it's very thick. It's very detailed. It's probably not going to pass much at all, at least in the next 2 years. But it does show that the Democrats, at least the establishment Democrats, have taken major cues from the issues that Bernie Sanders was talking about in 2016. In that way, he's right. But still, some of the democratic socialism ideas that Bernie Sanders espouses are not going to be necessarily a part going forward of the Democratic platform, whoever becomes president of the United States or the Democratic representative on the Democratic side.
But it seems like the declared candidates, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Kamala Harrises, Cory Bookers, they are taking the party farther and farther left. I mean, that's what makes Bernie Sanders' positions seem almost mainstream these days.
Well, if you get a Joe Biden coming in, we mentioned Michael Bloomberg if he comes in, Howard Schultz, who might run as a potential independent. These are people who are not going to necessarily be that far to the left and definitely represent a different quarter of the Democratic Party. And you could even say that about somebody like Cory Booker. You could say that about Amy Klobuchar, too, at least in certain ways. So there's a diversity of candidates racially, ethnically, age-wise. You have traditionalists all the way up to millennials going on right now. So if you want a Democratic candidate that really, really fits your personal beliefs and political philosophies, and you are a Democrat, you're going to have a lot to choose from, John.
You mentioned Joe Biden. He says that Biden's potential candidacy is the key as to whether or not Hillary Clinton might actually get into the race. Listen to this.
I think it depends upon how the field is shaping up. I think if the party looks too far to the left and there's no front runner, she'll get in. I think if Joe Biden gets in, that probably means she won't run if he gets in. If he doesn't get in, I think the field will be open for her.
And I didn't introduce that correctly. That's Mark Penn. He worked for both Clintons in their presidential campaigns. He is the one who says that a Biden candidacy might prevent Hillary from getting in.
Well, before anyone talks about Hillary Clinton, let's figure out what Joe Biden's going to do. Joe Biden has wanted to run for years. Joe Biden has run 2 other times, back in 1988 and 2008. He didn't do very well then, but that was before he was vice president of the United States for 8 years. So he's 76 years old. He's somebody who is obviously at the end of his political career. So if he's going to do it, he's going to do it now, and he really does want to do it. What's holding his back could be family considerations, would be number one. His wife isn't really all that thrilled about doing it, so that could be a consideration for Joe Biden as he does the calculus, and that's going to be happening over the next couple of weeks.
It certainly seems more Democrats are going to be jumping in. Dave Leventhal, Center for Public Integrity, thank you.
Hey, thank you, John.
A bill to award Colorado's electoral votes for president to the winner of the national popular vote is heading to the governor's desk for signature there. Alicia Acuna explains what's going on.
Colorado's democratically controlled legislature voted this week to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which claims it, quote, would ensure that every vote will be equal throughout the U.S. and that every vote in every state will matter in every presidential election. States that join agree to award their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote, regardless of their own state's results. The movement got its start after the 2000 election when Al Gore won the popular vote, but George W. Bush won the Electoral College. It gained steam after it happened again to Hillary Clinton in 2016. Backers need states states totaling 270 electorals to join, the amount to win the presidency. Right now, 11 states in the District of Columbia belong, with Colorado's Democratic Governor Jared Polis' signature expected to add the state's 9 votes. All places Clinton won. With Colorado, organizers need just 89 more electoral votes.
And honestly, that would take some red states doing it.
Critics say this is an end run around the U.S. Constitution.
This is not something where the state legislatures independently, via compact, can come together and modify the federal Constitution. Article 4 says how states can join the union, and so states still have to abide by our supreme law of the land, which is the U.S. federal Constitution.
Supporters say it evens the playing field for voters, pointing out the majority of campaign events in 2016 took place in just a dozen battlegrounds.
Why do 12 states get to pick the president, right? So that's what's happening now.
But those opposed worry candidates would primarily visit states with big populations.
And so this would be taking away your and my vote and saying, let's let someone else in another state decide what Colorado is going to do.
A Pew Research poll last year showed a majority of Americans supported changing the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. The National Popular Vote Compact would not change the Constitution, and it wouldn't get rid of the Electoral College. That would take action from Congress. In Denver, Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
To Nigeria now, where that nation's presidential election took place today. Nigeria's army says it killed 6 people it describes as political hoodlums in the deadliest reported confrontation during Election Day. Despite that, some voters expressed optimism about the proceeds.
Well, the process is fine. From every indication, it's a successful exercise, although it's too early to judge. But security, they are here. Everybody is behaving responsibly. There's no threat to the exercise at all. It's peaceful. I think it will succeed.
Kitty Logan has more from London.
Hi, John. So Nigeria's election was marred by some violence and logistical hitches at the start of the day, but most people were able to get out to vote. Votes are now being counted in many areas. Voting was extended at some polling stations, which were late opening due to those technical problems. Organising this election was a challenge. Over 72 million Nigerians are voting for a president from around 70 candidates. The current Nigerian president, Muhammadu Buhari, is hoping to be re-elected. He's challenged by former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. Both claim they can win, and observers agree it is too close to call. The election was originally scheduled to take place last Saturday, but it was postponed at the last minute due to logistical issues. Nigerian security forces say extremists also tried to disrupt the vote by firing on a city in the northeast earlier in the day. Some say that violence stopped them voting. The attack has since been claimed by ISIS. The Nigerian military has also been fighting the Islamist extremist group Boko Haram for around 10 years. The militants still have a stronghold in the north of the country. There they continue to carry out regular attacks and disrupt local communities. But organisers will be relieved that disruption by extremists was minimal. Results are expected within the next few days. John?
Kitty Logan, thank you. Chicago leaders calling out celebrities for jumping to conclusions as the city continues to deal with the fallout over the Jussie Smollett case. Plus, women taking Catholic bishops to task. A look at day 3 of the unprecedented 4-day summit on the church's long-running cases of sexual abuse.
Let us not hide such events anymore because of the fear of making mistakes. Too often we want to keep silent until the storm has passed. This storm will not pass.
Fox News Channel on Sirius XM. Your favorite shows on Channel 114. Plus, every story, every 15 minutes. Fox News headlines 24/7, Channel 115.
Now to the growing backlash against Jussie Smollett. Chicago leaders are slamming the Empire actor for claiming to be the victim of a racist and homophobic attack, which he's now charged with orchestrating on himself. Two aldermen calling out those who publicly supported him, releasing a joint statement saying Mr. Smollett severely underestimated the capabilities of our world-class police department. In today's climate where emotions run high, we need to take a step back, not rush to judgment, and let the police do their jobs. Many officials and celebrities rushed to Jussie Smollett's defense without taking the time to consider the facts and let the evidence be collected. While patience is often difficult during volatile times, it is what is sorely needed. Smollett was released on bond Thursday after being charged with filing a false report. Catholic bishops sharing a message of optimism on day 3 of Pope Francis' 4-day Vatican summit on sexual abuse, saying the Catholic Church is now much closer to adopting worldwide policy when it comes to handling allegations.
Some cultures have not yet experienced the amount of revelations that we have, say in Ireland or in other parts of the West. But we've been trying to communicate to them that, listen, just because it hasn't come forward doesn't mean it is not there. And therefore we need to be working on prevention, on education, and we need to have very clear guidelines, and then we need to implement them.
Lauren Green is in Rome with more.
On the third day of the first ever Vatican Summit on clerical abuse, the Pope, the bishops, and religious leaders focused on the issue of transparency and facing the ugly truth that it has been sorely lacking in the church.
This storm will not pass.
Bishops today got a bit of a tongue lashing from a nun, Nigerian Sister Veronica Openibo, one of a handful of women to speak here, basically called out the bishops as being like the Pharisees and Sadducees that Jesus condemned.
Yes, we proclaim the 10 Commandments and parade ourselves as being the custodians of moral standards. Why did we keep silent for so long?
Victims of clergy abuse marched in Rome's Piazza del Popolo, or People's Plaza. Hailing from at least 20 countries, they came to keep the pressure on the bishops. But Phil Saviano, who was sexually abused by a priest when he was 11, says this summit feels like there is some progress.
Cautiously optimistic that something positive is going to come out of this.
And there is a sense that the bishops are seeing the light. Many are meeting with abuse victims and hearing their stories. And one German cardinal revealed what happened in one of his local dioceses, a blatant abuse of power.
Files that could have documented the terrible deeds and named those responsible were destroyed.
Even though there will be no final document coming from the summit, the bishops are still asking for some kind of guideline they can take back home with them. And so a handbook is being created to give them something concrete. And while tomorrow is officially the end of the summit, with the Pope giving his final word, they know it really is just the beginning of any real change. John?
A Fox News alert. The National Transportation Safety Board is just wrapping up a news conference about the crash of an Air Atlas cargo plane into Trinity Bay, about 30 miles short of the Houston International Airport. It was on its way from Miami, flying cargo for Amazon. The Transportation Safety Board says they have a GO team on the way. They're trying to figure out what caused that Boeing 767 cargo plane to simply fall out of the sky when it was only 30 miles from its destination. 3 people on board, all 3 are believed to have perished. We will keep you updated here on Fox. A welcome spectacle in England. U.S. and Royal Air Force planes roaring over the city of Sheffield in honor of 10 brave Americans who died saving the lives of children. Benjamin Hall has that story.
Stay made on the screen.
a flyover to honour American heroes, 75 years in the making.
Thank you. I can't believe all this. This is unbelievable to me.
In 1944, an Air Force crew of 10 men sacrificed their lives to save a group of English schoolchildren.
We heard this plane coming over. My friend said to me, he says, "This plane doesn't sound right. I've never heard one like this."
82-year-old Tony Fools says he's never forgotten that day. American Lieutenant John G. Kriegshauer was flying a mission from an English airbase to occupied Denmark when his plane was hit by enemy fire. He managed to coax it back over land, spotting a park where he could try to crash land. But at the last moment, he saw a group of children playing in the park.
The pilot went like that to us. And of course, 8 years old, we thought they were just waving, so we just waved back.
Fools says he now realizes the pilot was trying to get them to run away. But rather than risk hitting them, Lieutenant Kriegshauer veered off and crashed into the woods nearby. None of the 10 airmen on board survived.
He got a choice to make. He could have landed on the green, or he could have died, because there's no way he would have got over these trees.
Tony Fools has made it his mission to see that the 10 airmen are remembered for their heroism.
I'll love them to bits, and I will always love them to bits.
Friday, his work paid off. Thousands of people attended a memorial flyover in their honour, flown by American and British forces together. Several of the airmen's relatives travelled to the UK for the moment.
Coming here today and seeing 10,000 people and the aircrafts flying overhead, words can't convey how much all of that coming together means to me and to the other families.
Tony Fools says that a few years after the crash, he began scattering flowers at the site. In 1969, a formal garden memorial was set up to honour it. Mr. Fools has been tending to that memorial ever since. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
A daring water rescue in Arizona. Emergency crews, with help from a helicopter, rescued 2 people from rushing water in the Santan Valley area yesterday. The Pinal County Sheriff's Office says the 2 were trying to cross a stream on foot when the woman fell in. When the man jumped in to try to help her, he was caught in the current as well. Both reportedly are doing fine right now. Well, one lucky dog has quite a tale to tell after the fire department comes to the rescue. That story coming up. Plus, here's Jesse with a preview of tonight's Watters World.
A man has a gun pulled on him just for wearing a MAGA hat. We have a hate crimes hoax investigation and